Hello, this is BBC News. I'm Duncan Golostani. Our top stories. The United States is criticised by fellow UN Security Council members for calling an emergency meeting over protests in Iran. Panic and confusion at Toronto's Pearson Airport as two planes collide on the ground, sparking a fire on one of the aircraft. The author of a damning book on Donald Trump says he stands by everything he wrote in his depiction of a chaotic White House.
I will tell you the one description that everyone gave, everyone has in common. They all say he is like a child.
And the east coast of America in the grip of an Arctic blast. At least 19 people have died, and temperatures could fall to minus 40 degrees Celsius in some places this weekend. Anti-government protests in Iran. It was called by the US Ambassador Nikki Haley after a week in which the Trump and the protesters. The meeting went ahead despite objections from Russia and some other council members. Our State Department correspondent Barbara Pletusher reports.
Nikki Haley warned Iran that the world was watching its response to the anti-government protests. She used the platform of the UN to amplify the message of President Trump, who's been tweeting support for the Iranian demonstrators.
The Iranian people will determine their own destiny, and let there be no doubt whatsoever. The United States stands unapologetically with those in Iran who seek freedom for themselves, prosperity for their families, and dignity for their nation. We will not be quiet. No dishonest attempt to call the protesters puppets of foreign powers will change that. The Iranian people know the truth, and we know the truth.
This unusually robust stance on human rights by the Trump administration coincides with a policy to curb what it sees as Iran's malign influence in the Middle East. The Iranian ambassador called the meeting a farce and repeated charges that the protests were directed from abroad, which Ms. Haley denied.
There is a long history of U.S. bullying at the UN, but it is a preposterous example of purely internal affairs of a nation. In this case, protests that the Iranian government has
the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action.
That's the agreement which restricts Iran's, Trump says, is deeply flawed. He has to sanctions suspended under the deal. Barbara Pletusher, BBC News, Washington.
Information about news now. Heavy flooding in the Democratic Republic of Congo has killed at least 37 people. Torrential rains caused landslides and a river running through the capital Kinshasa to overflow. 10 million people live in the city, where the problems have been made worse by poor drainage and unauthorised building around the waterways. Thousands of Catalans have shown their support for jailed pro-independence leaders at the traditional Three Kings parade. On Friday, Spain's Supreme Court ordered former Catalonian Vice President Oriol Junqueras to remain in custody in prison while authorities investigate his role in the Spanish region's independence movement. The Oscar-winning producer and director Paul Haggis has been accused of sexual misconduct by 4 women. A civil lawsuit filed by a publicist last month accusing the Canadian film forward. Mr. Haggis, who directed the film Crash, has denied the original allegation. His lawyer says the latest claims were also untrue. The US Secretary of State Rex Tillerson has defended Donald Trump's fitness for public office after a new book raised questions about the president's mental health. Mr. Tillerson said he'd had no reason to question the president's mental fitness. President Trump has called it a phony book full of lies. Our North America editor John Sopel reports.
Not quite Harry Potter, but they were queuing to get their hands on Fire and Fury. And if Donald Trump had the powers of the young wizard, he could have made this book disappear. But he doesn't. and this damning portrait is now available for everyone to read.
What I'm most looking forward to is seeing what we all know is going on just below the surface.
I'm expecting the White House to be as absolutely dysfunctional as the leaks would make it seem.
I think no one really gets tired of palace intrigue.
The picture it paints of life in the West Wing is unsparing. Allegations of marital strain, of tears and tantrums, of dysfunction and improvisation. And at the epicenter of every storm, Donald J. Trump.
I will tell you the one description that everyone gave, everyone has in common. They all say he is like a child. And what they mean by that is he has a need for immediate gratification. It's all about him.
And the gravest charge of all, Wolf alleges that a number of his unnamed sources told him the president was mentally unfit to remain in office, a charge that brought this response from the president's spokeswoman.
It's disgraceful and laughable. If he was unfit, he probably wouldn't be sitting there and wouldn't have defeated the most qualified group of candidates the Republican Party has ever seen.
The president has been on Twitter to rubbish the book, saying, "I authorized zero access to White House, actually turned him down many times for author of phony book. I never spoke to him for book, full of lies, misrepresentations, and sources that don't exist." But that's not how Michael Wolff remembers it.
I absolutely spoke to the president. Whether he realized it was an interview or not, I don't know, but it certainly was not off the record.
The author says he stands by every word, although with anonymous sources it's hard to fact check. The most remarkable thing about this is, given Michael Wolff's track record, why White House staff gave him access to the inner sanctum of the West Wing for months on end as virtually a semi-resident. The author was asked what he had to say about the threatening legal letter the president's lawyers had sent. His reply, "Where do I send the box of chocolates?" John Sopel, BBC News, Washington.
Temperatures along the east coast of America are expected to fall as low as minus 40 degrees Celsius as a brutal cold spell continues into the weekend. At least 19 people have died since a powerful blizzard hit much of the east coast on Thursday. The storm also caused floods which have now frozen in the record-breaking temperatures, adding to the problems. Thousands of flights have also been cancelled. From New York, Laura Trevelyan reports.
The morning after the snow cyclone, and this was the scene in one part of Massachusetts. An all-out effort is underway to clear mountains of snow, but the sub-zero conditions are making life very difficult. Even the sea has frozen in areas of New England. The winter hurricane conditions have brought not only heavy snowfall, but flooding too. In coastal Massachusetts, strong winds coincided with the high tide, so that in Boston there was a 3-foot storm surge. The city's mayor is blaming the changing climate.
We're keeping an eye on all of those different floodings, and if anyone wants to question global warming, just see where the flood zones are. Those zones didn't flood 30 years ago.
Not far from Boston, in the beach town of Revere, and the flood waters which engulfed the streets have now frozen in place, trapping the cars in ice. The brutal conditions closed New York's major airports, though they've now reopened. New Yorkers are trying to take it all in there.
I want it to be over with. It's been way too long. I just want it to be nice and warm again.
The race is on to clear away the snow in Manhattan before it turns into dangerous ice. The storm brought in all this cold air from the Arctic, and so in aftermath we're due to have sub-zero temperatures for the next few days. It is so cold out here, minus 10 degrees Celsius, that already I can hardly feel my fingers or my toes. And the freezing temperatures are prompting many Americans to experiment. This particular trick is proving very popular in the deep freeze. Laura Trevelyan, BBC News, New York.
Kenneth Craig from CBS has been braving the storm in Boston for us.
Well, it's really been incredible to watch just how much things have changed here in Boston over the last 24 hours. Last night we were sitting at 20 425 degrees Fahrenheit. The snow was coming down. As you can see, the snow has finally stopped here in Boston, but what we are experiencing now is this Arctic blast that forecasters were expecting to make its way into the Northeast. Right now we're sitting at about 8 degrees Fahrenheit. We've got wind gusts up to 50 miles an hour here in Boston tonight. It's making for this bone-chilling cold that really is absolutely brutal. It feels like at times between 15 and 25 degrees below zero. Just take a look around and see for yourself the mess that's left behind from the storm that came through yesterday. We're talking about 13 inches of snow that fell here in Boston really within a matter of hours. It's been pretty remarkable to see just how good of a job crews have done here cleaning all of this up. You can see traffic is slow moving, but there are people on the roads tonight. Crews have cleared most of the streets. The sidewalks, for the most part, have been cleared, but the danger now lies with this Arctic blast. Temperatures that are only going to be in the single digits Fahrenheit here tonight and tomorrow morning, with wind chills that could be record-breaking. With all of this snow and with these damaging winds, of course, comes some tragedy. And at last check, we have about 22 deaths along the East Coast. Most of those deaths have to do with traffic accidents and that kind of thing, but some of the deaths have to do with hypothermia. So officials are warning people, if you do not need to be outside, don't go outside, and if you have to be outside, make sure you bundle up.
Kenneth Craig from CBS in Boston. Now turning to another potentially catastrophic weather event. In Madagascar, tropical cyclone Ava has made landfall along the northeastern coast. It brings with it the risk of massive floods and mudslides. The storm comes less than a year after the island was slammed by Storm Enewo, which claimed 78 lives and displaced thousands. Do stay with us here on BBC News, still to come. A new run of Bizet's Carmen opens in Florence, but there's a twist.
Emerson.